Why common sense is not common. Before every discovery, before every great idea, there was a moment of silence, a moment when someone stopped, looked at the world, and simply thought. That pause is where wisdom begins, yet in today's world, silence is rare. We scroll instead of reflect, we react before we reason. We've built a civilization of constant noise, and in all that noise, we lost something ancient and essential, the voice of common sense. Once, it guided villages, shaped decisions, and protected families. It whispered to the farmer before planting, to the traveler before a journey, to the friend before a promise. It was the invisible compass that kept humanity steady. But somewhere along the way, that compass cracked. We replaced thought with speed, reflection with reaction, conversation with comments. The more connected we became, the more divided our minds grew. Look around, brilliance everywhere, but wisdom in short supply. We can teach algorithms to learn, but can't teach ourselves to listen. We invent new ways to communicate, yet forget how to understand. We've filled the world with knowledge and emptied it of insight. People say common sense as though it should be natural, effortless, obvious. But if it were truly common, why does the world feel so confused? Why do simple lessons need to be relearned every generation? Maybe the problem isn't that people lack intelligence. Maybe it's that we stopped exercising it where it matters most. We think too fast, talk too loud, move too soon. We've forgotten that the mind, like a muscle, grows stronger in stillness and reflection. The wise of old, from the philosophers of Greece to the monks of the East, from the storytellers of Africa to the scholars of the Arab world, all knew the same truth. Before every action, there must be awareness. That awareness is what we now call common sense. So this is not just another talk, not just another video lost in the stream. This is an invitation to slow down, to think again, to remember the forgotten power of thought itself. Because if knowledge is the light of civilization, then common sense is the lens that keeps it from blinding us. Welcome to Mind Gen, and welcome to a journey through one of humanity's oldest mysteries. Why common sense is not common. 1. The mystery of the obvious. Common sense sounds like the plainest thing in the world, a private, obvious wisdom that everyone should share, and yet life proves otherwise. People who are brilliant in one realm will make terrible decisions in another. Entire crowds will follow obvious falsehoods, and sensible choices are often the rarest ones. The reason is simple but unsettling. What we call obvious is not a universal truth, but the accumulated residue of personal suffering, repetition, and story, the invisible archive of harms we've survived that now silently guide our choices. So when someone else hasn't had those same burns, the flame looks like play. That gap between private history and public expectation is the root of the paradox. Common sense is personal sense made habitual, not an inborn universal. 2. Origins. How sense was forged. Long before cities, schools, and philosophers, sense was survival. Don't touch the fire. Don't drink the water that smells. Don't walk the cliff at dusk. These were not instructions of taste, but the architecture of life, passed by story and ritual across generations. A grandmother's warning was a compressed report of lived catastrophe. Over time, survival heuristics became social heuristics. Share food, keep promises, respect neighbors, and those rules anchored communities. The modern shock is that our ancestral wiring still runs in a world reshaped by markets, algorithms, and anonymous networks, and instincts that once saved us now sometimes hold us back because they are tuned to different dangers. 3. Knowledge versus wisdom. We confuse access to facts with the capacity to use them. Knowledge is what you can store in your head or pull from a device. Wisdom is how you apply it under pressure. A person can recite medical protocols and still act recklessly in a crisis. A scholar may have elegant theories and yet ruin relationships through hubris. Wisdom is experience integrated. It is knowledge tested by consequences until it becomes habit, and that integration requires time, humility, and repeated small choices, the same daily grind most modern systems bypass in favor of certificates and quick wins. 4. The curse of the known. Once you know something, it becomes hard to imagine not knowing it. Experts forget the bewilderment of novices, teachers forget the early fumbling, and the learned can become blind to the path that led them to clarity. This cognitive trap causes impatience, scorn, and an inability to teach. The person who cannot remember ignorance will belittle those still learning, and in that dismissal common sense dies, because teaching common sense requires the generosity to re-enter the state of not knowing and guide others gently through the flames you once burned in. 5. Emotion outrunning reason. Humans are not purely rational calculators. We are feeling animals whose choices are often decided by the heart and then justified by the mind. Desire, pride, fear, and social hunger speak louder than syllogisms. Someone will know they should not reply in anger, yet do it to prove a point. Someone will know they should save, but instead buy for the immediate lift. The discipline of common sense is the discipline of emotion, pausing long enough to cool the rush and let reason catch up, building rituals that channel impulse rather than granting it dominion. 6. The loss of story. For millennia, wisdom was transmitted through story, parable, song, myth, family anecdote. These convey not only facts, but context, consequence, and feeling. A statistic about famine does not move like the memory of a neighbor who starved. Modern life has turned so much into data and headlines that the connective tissue of consequence is often lost. When stories dwindle, heuristics weaken. To rebuild sense, we need narratives that anchor facts to lived experience, so that knowledge ceases to be abstract and becomes embodied. 7. Education's missed lesson. Modern schooling prizes correctness, test scores, and credentials. It tends to teach what to remember rather than how to judge. This system produces minds that can compute but are unpracticed in the art of living. You meet graduates who are brilliant at exams and naive about life, because classrooms rarely simulate long-term consequences, emotional stakes, or moral ambiguity. Common sense emerges when education includes apprenticeship in living, when mistakes are allowed as lessons, and when the messy business of judgment is practiced, not merely discussed. 8. Culture as unseen software. Culture functions like invisible software that shapes assumptions, politeness, risk appetite, who to trust, what to prioritize, all of these vary widely across locales and classes. To mistake your cultural defaults for universal laws is to fall into arrogance. What counts as common sense in one village may be nonsensical in another city. The wise person learns cultural literacy and suspends quick judgment, recognizing that difference in practice often reflects coherence within a different frame of reference, rather than ignorance. 9. The ego problem. Ego resists correction. It confuses certainty with competence. The loudest and most confident voices often drown out quieter competence. People close their ears because admitting uncertainty feels like loss. But humility is not weakness. It's the engine of learning. Common sense grows where people are willing to be wrong, to change, and to listen. The stubborn insistence that one's instincts are infallible is the single greatest destroyer of practical judgment. 10. Speed, noise, and attention stealers. Our attention economy rewards immediacy and outrage. Notifications fragment thought. Virality privileges emotion over nuance. Under these pressures, the slow work of observation and reflection is squeezed out. Common sense requires contiguous time to notice patterns and form habits. When attention is distributed in microbursts across infinite feeds, the capacity to see long arcs of cause and effect declines. The antidote is protected attention, rituals of focus that restore the mental soil where sense can grow. 11. Shortcuts and the microwave mindset. Modern life tempts us with shortcuts, fast money, quick fixes, self-help slogans that promise metamorphosis overnight. But character and judgment compound slowly. Shortcuts often skip the painful, necessary steps: patience, repetition, failure, so the result is brittle, not sturdy. Common sense prefers the long route because it builds contextual knowledge. A life built on instantism is prone to spectacular collapse because it lacks the slow-formed scaffolding of experience. 12. The economy of mistakes. How a society treats mistakes shapes its collective sense. If failures are shamed and hidden, learning becomes private and scarce. If mistakes are examined openly and used as public lessons, the community becomes wiser. Ancient apprenticeships normalized error as part of growth. Modern social media invites public shaming, which teaches people to conceal rather than to learn. A healthy culture encourages honest confession and public reconstruction of error, and that transparency is essential to making common sense common. 13. Empathy is practical intelligence. Common sense is not just raw logic. It's logic informed by empathy. Understanding how other people feel and act allows you to predict consequences and avoid harm. A politician who reads polls but lacks empathy misjudges people's motives. A business that understands customer fear makes better choices than one that simply follows metrics. Empathy connects cognition with consequence. It transforms cold calculation into humane judgment, and that is a cornerstone of practical sense. 14. The digital dilemma. Technology amplifies certain capacities, but at a cost. It externalizes memory and calculation, shortens attention, and creates illusions of competence. GPS teaches routes without attention to place. Calculators teach answers without number sense. Recommendation engines shape desires without reflection. These conveniences are not neutral. They redirect cognitive labor and can atrophy the intuitive skills that common sense depends on. To protect sense, we must sometimes do things the hard way. Navigate without GPS, calculate in our head, read slowly, to keep our intuitions exercised. 15. Time and the maturation of judgment. There are insights you can only see through the rearview mirror of time. Proportion, perspective, and the ability to tolerate delayed outcomes come with lived cycles of success and failure. Youth often has clarity of thought, but lacks temporal depth. Age gives depth, but can harden into cynicism. The person with deep common sense balances youthful curiosity with tempered experience. They have seen seasons change and understand the rhythm of cause and consequence. 16. The practice of pause. If there is a single habit that breeds sense, it is the practice of pause, stopping long enough to breathe, to name emotion, to consider consequences. Pause is a micro-resistance against impulsivity, a space where reason can counterbalance feeling. It is ancient. Stoics advised a small inner council before action, and yet modern life rarely allows it. Training your pause is training your higher judgment. It converts reflex into choice, and choice into a life shaped by intent rather than habit. 17. Slow rituals and daily habits. Common sense is built on tiny, repeated acts, saving a portion of income, sleeping enough, delaying big purchases, apologizing quickly, checking sources before sharing. These slow rituals create a baseline of stability and make better choices automatic. They are boring, small, and easily abandoned when culture pressures for spectacle, but they matter more than brilliant one-off decisions. Over years, these small moves compound into a temperament that sees danger and avoids it. 18. The art of self-correction. Wise people are not those who never err, but those who examine their errors. Self-correction requires honesty, a willingness to feel shame briefly, and the courage to change. Practices like journaling mistakes and their lessons, asking trusted friends for candid feedback, and setting public commitments that invite accountability all accelerate the conversion of error into sense. The person who owns mistakes converts shame into capital of wisdom. 19. Story, parable, and repeated example. Ancient cultures taught via parable because parable carries moral geometry. It compresses events and consequences into memorable form. Modern case studies can serve the same function if they are told fully and honestly. CEOs who burn out, towns that recovered after prudent governance, families that rebuilt after betrayal. These narratives are the raw material of sense. They provide vicarious pain and pattern recognition in safety. Build a reservoir of stories, and your intuition will draw from it. 20. Humility is strategy. Humility is not self-abasement. It is an epistemic strategy that keeps you flexible. When you accept your own fallibility, you can change quickly, learn faster, and correct courses before errors calcify. Humility reduces defensiveness and increases curiosity, both central to common sense. The truly sensible person wears modesty like armor because it protects against the arrogance that blinds so many brilliant minds. 21. Practical exercise. Daily after-action report. A simple, replicable exercise creates disproportionate returns. At the end of each day, one decision you made, one thing you learned from it, and one small corrective you will take tomorrow. This tiny after-action report converts experience into explicit lesson and accelerates pattern formation. Do it 4 months and you'll find your judgment changes quietly but substantially. The habit builds a private database of consequence that the mind begins to consult automatically. 22. Practical exercise. Slow media diet. Consciously limit impulsive media consumption. Set to 30-minute blocks for news. Turn off notifications and replace micro-scrolling with 30 minutes of long-form reading or walking. This preserves the uninterrupted time necessary for reflection and allows you to notice patterns rather than fragments. Over time, the slowed attention cultivates deeper intuition and reduces reactive behavior, driven by attention economy incentives. 23. Practical exercise. Ask the 5 whys. When confronted with a decision or a belief, ask why. 5 times to move from surface rationale into root cause. This method, borrowed from systems thinking, forces you beyond convenient explanations to underlying motive or structure. The 5 whys exposes hidden assumptions and helps align action with real causes, which is the essence of practical sense, acting on reality rather than on comfortable stories. 24. Practical exercise. The humility schedule. Schedule once a week a conversation with someone who disagrees with you, not to win, but to understand. Listen for 30 minutes without rebuttal, and then summarize their view before responding. This trains the muscle of empathy and prevents the echo chamber that kills common sense. The weekly humility conversation lowers defensiveness and broadens perspective incrementally. 25. Case study. Financial foresight. History shows repeated financial bubbles, tulips, South Sea, housing, and each repeat reveals human tendencies, greed, herd behavior, and short horizons. Common sense in finance is simple. Live within means, understand leverage, and assume cycles. But knowing these axioms doesn't guarantee practice. Culture and incentive structures often push toward risk. A common sense investor therefore builds rules, automatic savings, a margin of safety, and the humility to accept uncertainty, converting easy principles into durable practice. 26. Case study. Relationships and patience. In relationships, the wisdom is often banal. Listen more, speak less, forgive faster, and keep promises. Yet intimacy fails because we resist humility and impatience runs the show. Stories from communities that practice ritual apology, clear communication, and repair show that simple practices preserve connection. Common sense here is not a clever maneuver, but the stubborn repetition of basic decency over years. 27. Case study. Politics and scale. Political common sense falters where incentives reward short-term theatricality over long-term governance. Elected officials chase headlines, bureaucracies manage optics, and voters prefer dramatic fixes. Systems that tether rewards to long-term outcomes, independent civil services, transparent metrics, deliberative assemblies, restore structural sense. At scale, common sense becomes design, building institutions that reward prudence rather than performative certainty. 28. Case study. Workplace culture. Companies that prize speed over study often make expensive mistakes. Those that encourage postmortems, slow onboarding, and mentorship accumulate organizational sense. Google's famed Project Aristotle found that psychological safety, people feeling allowed to be wrong, drives better teams. The workplace that allows error and learns from it is a crucible of common sense. The one that punishes failure creates brittle decision-making masked by short-term wins. 29. The role of mentors and the lost apprenticeship. Mentorship accelerates sense because it exposes novices to an experienced archive of mistakes without requiring them to burn the same hand. Apprenticeship used to be common across trades. Modern careers often lack it. Seek older minds, ask to watch before you act, and accept correction. Mentors compress decades into conversations. They are the bridge between knowledge and lived judgment. 30. Balancing skepticism and trust. Common sense requires both healthy skepticism and the capacity to trust. Too much skepticism breeds paranoia. Too much trust breeds exploitation. The sensible person becomes calibrated, default to neither extreme, verify important claims, and build trust slowly. In social systems, defaulting to calibrated trust while protecting critical assets is a strategy that multiplies cooperation and minimizes harm, a pragmatic equilibrium between cynicism and naivete. 31. The spiritual dimension, temperance and moderation. Across spiritual traditions, the advice converges: balance desire, avoid extreme reactivity, and cultivate inner steadiness. Stoicism teaches assent, Buddhism teaches mindful noticing, Christianity teaches virtue through habit. Each tradition gives rituals that shape temperament. Temperance is not dogma, it is training the appetites so that reason can function. Spiritual practice, even secularized, often supplies the scaffolding that makes common sense possible. 32. Long-range thinking, the legacy lens. A sensible life is lived partly through the lens of legacy. Imagine the effects of your actions 10, 20, 50 years out. This mental time travel reframes petty impulses and elevates long-term payoffs over ephemeral wins. Individuals who habitually imagine their actions in the context of decades, financial stability for children, reputational investments, ecological consequences, make choices aligned with durable flourishing rather than transient reward. 33. Reflective questions for the listener. Pause and ask honestly, what mistake do I repeat? What public story have I swallowed without testing? When have I been proud but wrong? How often do I admit error? These reflective questions are not exercises in guilt. They are instruments of clarity. The person who interrogates personal patterns with curiosity, not condemnation, begins to see the scaffolding of habit and can rebuild it intentionally. 34. The daily practice, small scale, large effect. Commit to 3 small practices for 90 days. 1 habit for attention, daily 20-minute undistracted reading. 1 for emotion, a 10-second pause before speaking in conflict. And 1 for correction, a weekly short journal entry on mistakes. 90 days is long enough to start neurological change. These modest acts compound into a temperament that instinctively leans toward prudence, reflexively consults consequence, and gradually makes common sense a personal habit rather than a theoretical ideal. 35. The social responsibility of sense. Common sense cannot survive entirely in isolated individuals. It must be cultivated socially. Teach your children stories that include consequences. At work, model repair rather than shame. In civic life, reward long-term thinking. The reproduction of practical judgment depends on cultural choices. If we design public life to reward spectacle, we get spectacle. If we design it to reward deliberation, we get deliberation. The task is collective as well as personal. 36. The gentle art of guidance. When you see someone repeating a mistake, Guide rather than scold. Tell a story about your own error. Name the consequence and offer a tiny corrective practice. People change when they feel seen, not shamed. The gentle sharing of hard-earned lessons is one of the most efficient ways to spread common sense without provoking resistance. 37. The patience of the long view. Finally, remember that cultivating common sense is patient, generational work. You will not convert a culture overnight. You will not fix every error you encounter. Your job is to clear a little ground, plant a few seeds, and tend them steadily. Over years, small acts of clarity multiply. Over decades, they reshape neighborhoods, companies, and nations. The patient builder of sense trusts compound effects more than immediate applause. 38. A final meditation. Common sense is not scarcity alone. It is a call to practice, a way of life that values pause over reaction, story over headline, humility over certainty. It asks for small, sustained acts of truth-telling, reflection, and correction. If you accept that responsibility, you'll find your decisions growing quieter and more reliable, your relationships steadier, and your life more aligned with consequence rather than impulse. In the end, common sense may never be truly common across everyone, but it can become commoner in the circles you inhabit, the people you teach, and the choices you repeat each ordinary day. In the quiet of all this noise, after the lights fade and the voices stop arguing, we begin to hear something older than any language, the whisper of wisdom that never needed to shout. It is the same voice that spoke to our ancestors beneath open skies, that guided travelers through deserts, sailors across oceans, and thinkers through the dark corridors of their own doubt. Common sense, the forgotten teacher, still lives in each of us, waiting for silence to be heard again. In ancient times, life itself was the teacher. Nature rewarded the wise and punished the careless. The hunter learned patience, the farmer learned timing, the elder learned restraint. Wisdom was not a luxury, it was survival. People watched the stars to understand direction, and they listened to stories to understand life. They made mistakes, but they learned from them because every error carried a visible cost. Now we live in an age where mistakes can hide behind screens, where distractions drown out reflection. We have conquered the elements, but not our impulses. We chase knowledge, but lose understanding. The modern human knows more about the galaxies than about the human heart. We design machines that think, yet forget to think about what truly matters. Our ancestors might look at us all surrounded by light yet blind to wisdom, and wonder how we became so smart yet so unwise. We have traded depth for speed, focus for noise, meaning for momentum. The irony of our progress is that it has given us everything except the ability to slow down and think clearly. But common sense has not died. It has only been buried under distraction. It waits for anyone willing to pause, reflect, and see the world not through screens, but through their own eyes. It is there when you admit you don't know everything. It grows when you listen more and speak less. It deepens when you observe life without rushing to judge it. The laws that guided the wise of old still guide us today. Patience, humility, discipline, empathy, and respect for truth. These are not ancient values, they are timeless coordinates that help every generation find its way. So if this message has stirred something in you, that quiet reminder that wisdom still matters, that thinking deeply still counts, then take a moment to carry it forward. Don't just let it fade when the video ends, share it. Let someone else remember that being thoughtful is still powerful. Like this video if it spoke to your mind. Comment if it touched your reasoning. Subscribe if you want more journeys like this, explorations that make us pause, question, and grow. This isn't just a channel. It's a movement of thought. Together, we can make reflection popular again. Together, we can make sense common once more, because in the end, knowledge fills the mind, but common sense shapes the life. So think deeply, live wisely, and remember, the mind is your greatest generator.